The hauntings facing the Bell family had been increasing in ferocity and intensity for the past few years since it began in 1817. But, finally, they started to take on a more personal nature, as almost a vendetta, if you will, particularly in regards to John Bell. Now, John Bell was not a man prone to drinking or drinking to excess. He didn't use any kind of, substances or anything like that. He was a man who was often described as being very vigorous in health and robust in the chest and shoulders. So people began to be concerned when they noticed that as time progressed, John Bell started to seem to suffer from physical illness or ailments, particularly in the form of, for example, when he would be in mid-conversation with someone, suddenly his eyes would just go blank, and his jaw would grow slack, and for a few moments his lips would quiver and tremble. And then all of a sudden he would start to blink like he was just waking up. And then afterwards, he would, without even excusing himself from the company of his friends, walk off and make his way back home. And this began to persist so much so that it got to the point where in many cases John would not even go out into public. He preferred to stay on his homestead so people couldn't see him in this odd way with these apparent fits that were plaguing him. And in some cases, John seemed to just sit in front of the fireplace or wherever he was at on the property, and he would just stand or sit and stare for hours and hours and hours. And even when in some cases it got so bad that he was confined to bed, he would just stare up at the ceiling or at the walls for hours on end without even saying anything to anybody or even eating. But now, let me be clear in the fact of the matter that although things were tending to shift the focus towards John Bell at this point, the haunting certainly didn't stop in regards to the rest of the family. Now, at one point, while John happened to be bedridden, one of his daughters had went out to go collect the eggs from the hen house. And as she was walking down the trail, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. And she turned around and looked and saw this figure of a woman who had her bonnet on and her head was kind of face down, but the daughter almost thought she recognized her as one of the women from the village. So she said, "Well, hello, how are you?" And the figure said nothing. Well, maybe she didn't hear her, but regardless, she had a chore to do. And so she went on to collect the eggs, and then as she turned around, the figure was still standing there in the middle of the road, with its head slightly located towards her. Excuse me. But the daughter then cried out again, "Hello, how are you?" And at this point, with no response being forthcoming, she's a little perturbed. And so she says that she walked up in the direction of the lady, but as she did so, suddenly the lady took her bonnet off and laid it off to the wayside, and then began to just furiously rub her hands through her hair. And the closer she got, the faster her hands went, until they almost moved at a speed that was impossible to catch by the eye. And to her horror and amazement, as she got closer, she suddenly heard a sound that was coming from the woman's scalp as her hands were moving through her hair. And the daughter realized in shock that with every time this woman was moving her hand through her hair, she was grabbing a hold of it and just pulling out big clumps of hair as she went and dropping it at her feet on the roadside. Well, as you could easily well imagine, the daughter was very well frightened by this and retreated to the safety of the house. But if she thought that being inside the walls of the cabin were going to get her away from the specter, she was sorely mistaken. And we'll discuss what happened next with that particular specter in our upcoming video.